Thanks, everyone. I'm Scott Santons. I've been researching, writing, and advocating for the concept of UBI for the last 10 years. For those who don't know, UBI stands for Unconditional or Universal Basic Income. It's the idea that every individual in society can and should be guaranteed a periodic cash payment without means test or work requirement in order to make their way in the world upon a firm foundation. I recently started the Income to Support All Foundation, or ITSA Foundation, which provides support to projects that aim to make UBI a reality through research, storytelling, and implementation. You can learn more about ITSA Foundation at itsafoundation.org. And today we have Floyd Marinescu, who is he's a founder of both UBI Works and Commonwealth over in Canada, and looking forward to discussing with him the future of work in general in basic income. And also we get to celebrate the success of the Comingle crowdfunder on Indiegogo. We'll be talking a bit about that. My co-host Conrad Shaw and Josh Worth are the co-founders of Comingle.
Hello.
UBI guy is Conrad, and Comingle is Josh. Just a quick summary, Comingle is one of the first projects we're promoting at the ITSA Foundation. And Josh, do you actually just want to give a quick intro to what Comingle is all about?
Yeah, quick intro. It's Comingle's a money sharing app that allows people to pool a percentage of their income into a community fund. And that fund gets divided up evenly every week. And that the result then is that members give money when they have it and get money when they need it, so that no member will ever go a week without income. And you can learn all about it at comingle.us. And yeah, we just finished our Indiegogo campaign, or not finished, we hit our first big milestone. So. Conrad, you want to give an update?
I can give a little update on that. So it was a 30-day campaign, and we were shooting for $75,000, and we got it with about a week to spare. It's up to about $79,000 now, and there's a cool thing about Indiegogo where you can keep the campaign open. So we're keeping it open and retooling the focus to the people meter, which is basically building a community being the main focus of the crowdfund moving on. So we're currently at $78,746 with 634 backers. We're shooting for 750 backers as our next goal. So go visit the campaign link in the comments and be part of that. Share it around with your friends. I have put a post in the comments with the relevant links for ITSA Foundation and the crowdfund and our YouTube channel, where we'll be putting a lot of fun content out there moving forward.
Great. So I also like to, we've been starting the show, it'll be a show where actually we'll be aiming for Wednesdays at this time, 12 to 2 every Wednesday. And
Eastern.
Yeah, Eastern time. And we'll be calling it It's Alive. That's so the credit goes to Josh on that clever wordplay,
or the blame, credit or blame, you decide. Yeah.
Yeah, and so part of the weekly show, besides speaking with our guests about specific basic income topics, are the recent basic income news. Well, hello there.
Sorry, I have a baby on my
Well, I mean, if you don't want to hear the basic income news, okay.
I'm on morning duty. I'll meet the mic.
But so the news that I would like to cover, I think the most exciting news is definitely the halfway report from the Denver Basic Income Project. And for those who don't know, we actually discussed that project with the founder, Mark Donovan, just a couple weeks ago. So that's something that you can watch as well. It's available on the YouTube channel, Comingle's YouTube channel. But the official results came out just a matter of days ago. And you may have seen some of the initial news articles come out already, or you may have not seen it yet. But the top line stuff is that, so this was a pilot that is focused on the homeless. And there's 3 cohorts in this experiment. It's 1 year long experiment. One group is receiving $1,000 per month. One group received $6,500 upfront, followed by $500 a month. And the control group is receiving $50 per month. And at the 6-month point, no one receiving $1,000 per month reported still sleeping outside, which I think is an incredible headline finding. And besides that, full-time employment increased. There were fewer visits to the emergency room. There were fewer nights spent in jail. There was reported reduced feelings of distress and anxiety, and greater sense of hope. And people just feel safer and more welcome where they sleep. An example of that is maybe someone was already off the streets. Maybe they were like on someone's couch, friend's couch or something. And so they didn't have permanent housing, but at least they weren't on the streets. But now, thanks to having that basic income, now they can actually contribute to where they were, and now they just feel so much more welcome in those places. So that's also just a really interesting thing to see as a result of this. Besides the Denver report, there was actually also another report, which came out of Atlanta's Old Fourth Ward, where that's a 2-year pilot focused on Black women receiving $850 a month. And again, that's after 6 months of data. This is the preliminary report. And some of those findings: full-time employment increased 15%. Unemployment decreased 21%. There was a nearly 40% increase in educational enrollment. 7% of the recipients used the cash to start or grow a small business. Average debt decreased 4%. Mean savings increased 38%. Financial well-being scores increased 6.4%. There were improvements in both physical and mental health. More women got health insurance. It went from 69% covered to 74% covered. And there was decreased usage of TANF, SNAP, WIC, and other public assistance programs. I made note of a few key quotes from the report that I just shared too. Someone said, "Before I got on the program, I just didn't see a way out. I was just literally in a box, just trying to figure out what I was to do. It just took a lot of the stress that I had on me, off me, and it makes it easier for me to strive for more." Another one said, "I still have that same goal of starting a business. It's just now I can actually execute my plan because I have a car and a home." Another person said, "Now that I can afford childcare, my daughter is getting an education." And another one said, "I'm happier, whereas at first I thought I was just going to fall into a deep depression, but my spirits have been uplifted and I'm just really happy to be where I am right now." And finally, I really like this one too. Someone said, "I work in the Fourth Ward, so it's like the Fourth Ward is giving back to me, but at the same time, I'm giving back to the same community." Just like that final quote just, I think, really summarizes basic income, the universality of it. So with that being the main news, let's welcome Floyd as our guest, and let's start talking about the future of work. Floyd, do you want to tell us our listeners about yourself?
Yeah, looks like the baby's asleep almost. That's good. Yeah, so I run a software developer education company. We do learning events for software engineers. We just finished our big project here in San Francisco called QCon. We have about 700 engineers here, and I've been doing that for a long time, over 15 years, and I've been taking some of the profits from that work to fund basic income advocacy, including starting a group of marketing ninjas in Canada called ubiworks.ca that was focused on digital activism and getting Canadians to keep it loud, keep basic income front center. Raise change perception and basically show the political class that this is something people want. And over the last 4 years, we generated over 800,000 emails to various government officials at all levels, with an email list now that's around over 40,000 people and 40,000 Facebook followers, and been quite active. So if you're in Canada and you want to follow the basic income movement, follow our channels, join our lists. We are active, and we're sort of the voice in Canada to move this along. At least the activist voice. There's a lot of great organizations doing lobbying and more serious things like that. So we're keeping to our strengths are, which is marketing and social media and storytelling. One particular success I'm very proud of is we funded some research showing that basic income would grow the economy from the Canadian Center of Economics Analysis. And they found that it would grow the economy by more than it costs. Grow the economy by as much as the tourism and hospitality industries combined in GDP. And some of those language and talking points were taken up by the mainstream parties, people in the parties who are for basic income. And we did that because I think ultimately basic income is an election issue. Someone's got to run it and win. So we need to arm advocates and politicians with talking points that they need to win. And economic growth is one of those.
Yeah, I really like that. I really like that report. That was the first report that you did too, right? If I remember correctly.
That's right. Yeah, that was around 2019 or so, and it's still paying dividends. Like just last year, at the Liberal Party convention, which is like the Democrats for Canada, a resolution was passed using the exact language that exact sentence that'll grow the economy by more than it costs. So I feel really fulfilled, and these ideas will go forward until they finally work.
Floyd, what do you think about? There's always this who's going to do it first, and Canada and the U.S. have both taken turns, sort of leading the pack along with other countries. But who do you think's pushing further faster right now?
Interesting. Well, at least. So people, I think I would say Canada, but not exactly, not in an obvious way. First of all, there are a lot of supporters in the parties, like members of parliament. No parties officially for it, but there's so many supporters within the parties that have been public about it. One of our campaigns is even getting candidates to pledge support during election cycles, and there's a lot of support. I've not seen that kind of support. At least I'm not aware of what the support is among members of government in the U.S. So I think maybe a little further along, there's a bill in the Senate and the House to study how basic income could be done that I think will pass. Unfortunately, it's not to implement one. It's just to study how to implement one, but it'll still keep it alive in the discourse. And that's really important because again, it's an election issue, so we've got to keep it alive, keep the conversation going.
Yeah. I feel like in the U.S. it's like a guilty pleasure for some of our Congress people, but they won't go out and mention it too much when they're on the campaign trail because it's they're afraid to do so.
I feel what each of us are doing is it's very complimentary. It's like I would say, first of all, I also want to mention the Canadian Child Benefit Report, which is also a great report that UBI Works put out. And this is studying the child allowance there in Canada. And it's fascinating to see that they've essentially, what we did with the enhanced child tax credit has existed for more than a few years now in Canada. And I think there's probably a connection there as far as I love being able to point to the fact that, when people look at the enhanced child tax credit and say, oh, that was only 6 months worth of data, the CCB has existed in Canada for years and it's the same stuff. So that's good. And meanwhile, like the U.S. has been having all these various pilots all over the country in at the city level. In Canada, uh, really the only one was the Ontario pilot, which was canceled. And there just hasn't really been a whole lot of activity of pilots there. But then there does seem to be more activity among the politicians and people like city councilors and stuff expressing their support. And I'd really love to see like each city, like city after city, express their support. What's it even up to right now, as far as the number of cities that have voted just in support of it?
Oh, I don't. Yeah, we should probably keep a list of that somewhere, because that is a good sign of social proof. If I were to just guess, I would say maybe 8. I think, just from because all the stuff we've been retweeting from UBI Works and promoting. Whenever we post a video of a council voting in favor, it gets like 60,000 views,
Mm-hmm.
and because it seems official and people get excited, which is they should. And but unfortunately, motions are just motions.
Yeah.
But I think it matters. Every bit matters. It helps arm advocates. Advocates can mail their MPs and say, hey, eventually 20 cities have called for this. The government of Prince Edward Island, which is a province in Canada, all 4 parties, including the Conservative Party, have jointly signed a letter asking the federal government for funding to just do a basic income, like not even study it.
Yeah.
So that's a really cool example. Unfortunately, the feds have not responded, and but I hope they do before this term is over, because boy, that would be a great example for Canada, even if it was just an experiment.
Are you still actively recruiting to the CEOs too? That was something that people took interest in. Like how many Canadian CEOs are now on your list?
Yeah, that was actually the first project that I did when the Premier of Ontario just got elected, Doug Ford, and canceled the Ontario Basic Income pilot midway through in 2018. I was just going on a sabbatical. My first time in my life I would have taken more than 2 weeks off. He cancels the friggin'
Mm-hmm.
thing. I got so mad, and I just like, I got to do something about this. So I'm like, well, what can I do? And as a business owner, I'm in all kinds of networks. And I thought, well, people still think basic income is some social welfare thing. Again, we need to move this into the realm of centrist narratives and economic narratives, because that's where the politics are. So I thought, well, I have connections with other business leaders, so why don't I try and make that obvious, that there is actually support amongst business people for basic income. And so yeah, I managed to get 120 Canadian CEOs to sign a letter asking for to not cancel the pilot. We had a really cool launch event at Queen's Park in Toronto, and that was also a very important sort of marker of progress. And those videos still get tens of thousands of views, and we hear people in Parliament often citing that there's been CEO support for basic income. And I made sure that letter included all the best talking points. And then last year we relaunched it, this time with calling actually for basic income, not referring to the pilot. And I think we're over 100 signatures, but unfortunately, just kind of stopped there, because that's sort of the extent of my network, and it's hard to get others to get excited to reach out to their networks. Just there's a lot of social capital involved in asking someone to sign something when they're just busy and they're thinking about their own business and stuff. So, but it's still there. The letter's there.
Mm-hmm.
It's generic and timeless. So I hope it arms advocates for the next 10 years.
I just want to mention too, just for listeners who don't know the details, I think we should just cover just a little bit of that pilot in Canada. And I mean, I was so excited for that. This was going to be a big thing. It was going to last for 3 years, and it was the Doug Ford, who was running his campaign. During the campaign, said that he was asked directly about the pilot, and he said he would not cancel it. And then after he won, he was asked again, and he said, "Yeah, we're going to keep it." And then shortly thereafter, he canceled it. So I mean, this was just an outright lie on his part to the voters. And so not only, like, I'm sure there are plenty of people who voted for him who were like, well, he said that he's not going to cancel it. And then there was just like, how messed up is that you had people who were told that they were going to get this basic income for 3 years, and they had already resituated their lives around this. You know, they had started school, they had purchased cars to get jobs. Like they had planned on that income, and it was just pulled right out from under them. So even like that, what happened there in Ontario was also a good example of how important it is uh, to kind of put safeguards in place to make sure that that can never happen again in any pilot anywhere.
Absolutely. And I think it was politically motivated because he just won over a Liberal candidate before that, a Liberal government, who instituted the pilot. And the pilot results would have ended maybe about a year before the next election, which means that there'd be all this good news about this Liberal idea, at least from their point of view, just before an election. And I don't think he could allow that. So he canceled it just to avoid that kind of, just political capital being used against him. This is my theory. It's not written down anywhere. But that's really upsetting because he thwarted really good scientific study and good evidence that, hey, it could have armed him too. Maybe this pilot would not have been good, but he just fuck data. He needs to win. It. So I'm just really upset about that.
He could have claimed it as his. He could have said, like, this is my idea. I mean, we see that all the time, in the U.S., where someone votes against a bill and then it passes and then it turns out great. And they're like, you're welcome.
Like Donald Trump on the stimulus checks. There was a great argument that someone was doing all the 1-minute arguments for UBI, and they're like, the argument for libertarians, for progressives, for whatever. And then they had the argument for Trump, sort of appealed to, let's call it Trump bucks, and you'll be the greatest president of all time and the one who ended poverty. It's like, honestly, we're the shadow.
That's right. He could have been gone the way of Nixon and been for it.
Yeah.
I think, didn't he express support for this idea like in 1980 or something?
I'm not sure about that.
Maybe I'm confusing.
Did who express support for it?
Trump.
Oh yeah, Trump. No, he never expressed support. He did love the stimulus checks, but like he he's not on the record on actual basic income. But he has had things to say about work requirements, which he's like really for, and targeting that he's also for. So I'm not really a fan of universality. But yeah, he's never been on the record on like the actual question of basic income.
Okay.
If I remember correctly, his daughter is on the record, though. I'd have to double check that one, but I think she did share something at some point that was negative about basic income. And I don't remember what that was. Like maybe it was something like, this thing is socialism and it'll lead towards basic income. Like, again, I'm not 100% sure on that, but I do recall that somehow she was more negative than he has been reported as being.
I mean, she must have felt that people should really earn all their money.
Right, I'm sure.
Yeah. Well, the position of these, I was asking all of these CEOs who signed the letter that I worked on. You can see that CEOs for basicallyincome.ca. It's a really good place to point people to who say this is bad for the economy.
What am I?
And I just want to say some of their reasons for it. Some were like, well, we have so much wealth, there really shouldn't be poverty. The moral argument. Others were a racial argument. They shouldn't just be rich white kids who can afford to start businesses because that's what they encountered when they were in university, and they had to struggle. People of color. Others were like, well, I had a head start. I had either family or similar government programs that were temporary that gave them a chance to get ahead and start their businesses. And like, well, everyone should have a head start. Why not? These are the various arguments, and that these CEOs were for, and none of them really thought that it would reduce work. So it's all there.
One of my favorite videos that came out of the Ontario pilot, again, while this was happening, it was just already cool to see these examples of people using it. And one of them was that couple that had their own business, which I think was a restaurant, and they talked about how it was already helpful to them, and they thought they were in a saturation site and believed that people were coming in greater numbers, or just more spending just because they had more money to spend. And I love that from saturation sites. We need more saturation site experiments. So I think like that's where the great economic stuff comes from, is where you get a bunch of people who don't only have their own basic income to, take more risks, to have some capital to start a business, but then they also have more customers to spend their money, and that's just so key to the economic argument for basic income.
And there's so much speculation behind that too. There's so much devil in the details. How big the UBI is, what the parameters are of the border within which it's universal, where to an extent we can make these projections about how much we think it could save us on costs like crime and poverty and medical expenses, and we can make these guesses about how much there could be a windfall from the opportunity costs we're no longer experiencing from people able to start businesses and things like that. But really, we're not going to know until we try it. And that's kind of the impetus behind just starting to build an infrastructure with Comingle. But any way we could do some sort of a more permanent and saturated experiment of this would be huge. I think the closest examples we have that at least in my mind, one is Alaska, but it has it's only once a year and it's not that much money. And the other is the stuff Give Directly is doing with full villages in Kenya and I think a few other places where they can actually measure sort of the macroeconomic effect and the spillover effect of nearby villages who aren't even getting the basic income, whose business increased because of the sample population in the next village over. And I'm just endlessly curious about, what are we actually going to find out when we start building out this infrastructure and trying it out at scale?
Yeah, for sure. Let's get into the future of work argument now, since we kind of covered our bases with basic income, what's been going on there in Canada and stuff, and we can still kind of bounce back and forth. But I do want to direct the discussion more towards the future, and I think that I've written about this recently as far as like the nuance in this conversation, and how there's a lot of this discussion. It tends to be around this belief that there's going to be like no jobs, or there's going to be tons fewer jobs, and then not any new jobs, and then others will say on the other side, oh, there's going to be plenty of new jobs and it's not going to be a problem. But the details are important, and we can look at the decades of what we've witnessed so far from the impacts of automation since the 70s, as far as just really being an inequality driver. Like, we know that when we automate in general, that there's kind of less money going towards labor, more money going towards capital, and that just results in just this higher inequality, where you've got this less, more stagnant wages that are not rising with productivity. And I think that's what's one of the key reasons why basic income is so important to me, is to actually share that productivity that we have not been doing for decades. And aside from sharing that productivity with a cash dividend, I also believe that we need to actually shorten the work week. And we did this. We went from 6 days to 5 days. It's been like 100 years. It's time to go from 5 days to 4 days. That there are ways to make sure that productivity benefits us all, regardless of whatever happens as far as people being unemployed or not from automation. But there should be this rising floor.
Absolutely. And I mean, when encountering those kinds of arguments, I say, well, the future is going to be probably a reflection of the past in terms of what's been going on. What's going on is in general is lower wages.
Yeah.
Is a thinning of the middle class, and increasing both the top and the bottom of people joining the income earning brackets. And we should not be in an economy where more people are gaining low income work. It should be all moving upwards, right? And unfortunately, that's what's happening. So more people are actually in worse conditions, than in the past, and that's primarily results to automation. And I would argue that both globalization and some of the decline of union power is also being driven by automation, and that's just a reality. So now this has become so studied and so understood that even the former Bank of England and Canada Governor Mark Carney said that we need a way for people to afford to retrain in their 40s. We need to reform our income security so that there is sort of lifelong protections. And he's not saying basic income, because I guess in his position he can't, but it seems pretty obvious that that would be the solution. So, I see this as a way that we, at the very least, a way that we can channel some of the affluence that we're creating through automation that is a result of the contributions of generations past and the result of public investments and of community investments, so that everyone can have a basic income, can be beyond subsistence and pursue more in life.
For me, it's like all the distraction around, what's going to happen and people trying to predict is sort of a pointless game that people play to distract from what's actually going on. And I break it down for myself, at least, to the very basics. Much like with UBI, the first question I had was, is there enough money in society, which really means, are there enough resources in society? If we have enough housing, food, whatever, to actually provide everyone with enough and have overage, then it's a question of distribution. Like, how are we using the money? And similarly with, automation, if we have less need for people to do certain tasks, then whether or not there's less jobs or there's shorter work weeks or there's lower pay, it all amounts to the same thing. Human beings don't need to spend as much time to get as much productivity out. So instead of leading the conversation with, UBI is a necessity because of automation, I really like the framing that you just said, Floyd, where it's more of an opportunity. It's like, look, we have these extra resources are being freed up because we have these great tools. Why shouldn't we, instead of like I don't do automated checkout at the grocery store. It's like, no, I like the automated checkout because it means the person at the grocery store doesn't have to stand behind a cash register proving their value. They can do something more valuable to us all, like spending time with their kids, doing another job, creating the art they want to create. And the only real question now is, how do we make sure we get these abundant resources to people enough that they can pursue those more meaningful purposes in their life?
Yeah, I think we've hit a point where we're, the whole idea of just any sort of automation is you're creating a labor-saving device. I mean, ever since we've been making washing machines and dishwashers, those sort of automations are the whole idea from the get-go has been we need to, save our labor. But now we're at a point where we've saved a lot of labor. What do we do now? Because we're just sort of stuck with this. We've got extra time, but we've got extra things to do, but none of that is going to convert into money and livelihoods. And so we need to figure out some other way to provide that.
We've broken our system of distribution so that our focus on saving our labor has moved to saving our laboring. Don't save ourselves labor, save ourselves the labor market. It's just kind of switched completely backwards.
Yeah, it's crazy to me how, again, our productivity in the U.S. has more than doubled since the 1970s, and I believe it's similar in Canada too. And yet, it's only benefiting the top. It's being concentrated up there. Mm-hmm. And there's no repairing that. In order to, even if you were to re-index productivity to wages and it started rising in together again, there would still be all of that lost amount between these decades that is still not enough. You'd have to go back and say, all right, well, we need to make sure that the bottom 90% gets $50 trillion. It would be it's not going to happen. The only way to really make sure that it happens is to start issuing a dividend. And I think that's how people need to see this too. Like, we know the dividend language leads itself to universality and leads itself to this feeling of I earned that, I deserve that. You see that from the Alaska dividend, where everyone shares the Alaska, the resources of Alaska is are recognized as being a shared resource, and so everybody should benefit with an equal dividend. And I hope that we can actually come to see AI and robots and just all productivity enhancing technology in general as being something that is should be commonly owned and issued a dividend.
Well, yeah, with the $50 trillion too, it's not just a moralistic argument that we should all own it. It's that we already earned it, and it's been taken from us. Sort of skimmed off the top. So when people tell me, don't take from me, I earned every penny I ever made. I have two questions. One, or I first ask, what's your income? And if they say something that's in the top 1%, I say, not really. You leveraged your capital to make more than you actually earned, which is great for you, but is not sustainable. And if they're in the bottom, like 80% or so, I say, no, you didn't. You earned a lot more. Your boss paid you less than you were worth for your entire life. You were this $50 trillion. A chunk of that is yours.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think just in the whole question of what is the future of work, I keep thinking, like, hopefully it's less work. Like, maybe the whole concept of, like, productivity being the means that we use to measure, like, the success of our civilization and all that. It's like, maybe that's not the best measurement anymore. Maybe we've produced enough already. And I think that's the kind of thing that any discussion about UBI kind of intrinsically brings up. And I think we can all kind of, everybody here probably is like, yes, the best answer to the situation we're in is basic income. And I think, like, an exploration of, like, what does that mean for everybody, and is important.
Yeah, I think part of it too is just the choice. Like, that's what I feel is so important, is just the freedom to choose, the freedom to say yes to something. And so let's say you are a someone who works in a grocery store and checking people out, and there's now the auto checkout, and so then you're no longer needed, and maybe you lose your job. But maybe there's some people who really don't enjoy that job, and so it's great that they can go and find something else, as long as they have this income floor to actually support them and enable them to switch to something else. But then also there's people who actually do really enjoy that, and they love that interaction. They appreciated their job. They actually found, like, some meaning and purpose from it, just the interaction with people. And there's also people there's customers who are actually fully willing and wanting to continue interacting with people as a human, and having those face-to-face interactions, and they're willing to pay more for it. Automation can make it cheaper, but there will be stores where you're going to have human interaction as a premium, and basic income will actually enable people to both choose to do that work as a choice, and also enable people to choose to spend a little bit more to pay for that human premium as customers. And I think it's really important to see this kind of the voluntary nature of work, and how that will just so transform, with people being able to actually better figure out for themselves the work that it is that they want to be pursuing. And that even if something is automated, it doesn't stop you from doing that. It just will potentially cost more.
Yeah, there's a big difference between, like, somebody saying welcome to Walmart who actually wants to be there, and someone who is clearly there because they're miserable and don't have enough money.
Hey, we should take a second because Floyd, initially you said you had about 45 minutes today, and I want to be conscientious of your time. How are things going for you with your time?
Yeah, I've probably got another 15 minutes, and this is so much fun. Just hanging out and talking with you guys.
Yeah, it's always fun. Cool. I wanted maybe I wanted to put the cat out of the bag with the announcement that we talked about you making on this.
Sure.
Yeah, you wanna do it, or
sure. Okay,
I'm making too big of a deal of it.
I think we're
it was a big deal.
Here.
It was a big deal to us. It was huge.
We're all here because of Comingle, which is a really fascinating idea, and I really respect the work that you guys do, and I've been a supporter of Conrad's for a long time. And I am one of the matching donors, and matched other donations around $10,000 in total throughout the campaign. So,
yeah, it was hugely helpful. I mean, Floyd's always been a great supporter of UBI, and one of those visionaries types who supports work other than his own, and he's sort of lifted us up in a lot of occasions. And this is the kind of people we need in this movement. Similar with our Bootstraps project, he was a big help getting us up off the ground there. And if anyone's tried crowdfunding, it's incredibly difficult. You don't do it to raise quick money; you do it to start building a community. And Floyd was game to be one of our matching donors and help us, give us something to talk about through the doldrums of the middle of the month of crowdfunding, and really help push us up there. So yeah, thank you, Floyd.
Thank you. Well, I know you guys are serious. You're going to deliver this, and I think it's going to grow. And I think it'll be a very important use case to the world that people are willing to share and create a net, both for themselves and for others. I think it's a wonderful idea.
Yeah, for listeners who just joined too, just to provide a little bit more context of what we're talking about, who may have missed it earlier, there was a crowdfund for Comingle, and part of this, in the middle of this campaign, Floyd came in with the as an anonymous matching donor, matching $1 per $1, and that actually directly inspired other matchers to come in and with their own matching. So we actually got up at the maximum we had was 3 overlapping donors for a 9x multiplier. So at one point, someone could donate $10 and it became $90. And those matching dollars were just so key to bridging that middle part where a lot of campaigns just kind of have like the doldrums of fundraising, and more people get excited at the beginning and end, and it was just key to the success of this campaign. So yeah, thank you so much.
Yeah, it's just a beautiful case study of the idea that we're trying to put together here, which is, we have all kinds of people from different walks of life and backgrounds mixing their money together in sort of a spirit of solidarity. And our campaign being funded by a combination of the larger donors and the smaller donors sort of playing off of each other's energy is sort of a beautiful example of that,
It really matters. Just seeing at UBI, we're 100 donors, mostly small donations. So even someone's donating $1 a month, someone else is donating $5 a month, and all the way up to $100 a month. And that really matters. I just feel like you have a tribe. People believe in your work, and that's really important.
Yeah, absolutely. And let's since we have another 10 minutes to get into this, let's just get more into what we're thinking of what the future could be. And I guess maybe let's orient the discussion just maybe a little bit more around the positive, since we already started that, as far as talking about how we could have more time, there could be more choice in our work, but just in general, so much of this automation discussion, the future work, is about, there's just going to be so many bad things. There's going to be so much unemployment and democracy could, erode and fall to authoritarianism. Like, there's a lot of bad things that can happen that are important to recognize, but also just things could be so much better. And I feel that tends to fall by the wayside. So, like, just how could basic income help just make things so much better in combination with automation, as automation being a good thing, a potentially transformatively positive thing?
Yeah, well, I mean, I want to talk briefly about an essay that's very inspiring to me. John Maynard Keynes, one of the greatest economic minds in history, who in the 1930s wrote an essay called Economic Possibilities for Our Grandchildren. And he predicted that productivity would grow to a point that by 2030, we would have solved the subsistence problem. Nobody would be working just to survive, and people would be working because they want to work. People would choose to work 20 hours a week because they want to be of service to others. And that's such a beautiful vision. Like, you just saw capitalism eventually leading there, and one of the ways he hints at that we would achieve this is through income that's to which there's no duty or income that comes irrespective of work. He was suggesting that the wealthy of his times were the first to get to this end, but eventually it'll come for everyone, and the wealthy have income that they have they don't have to work for. So I see that in order to achieve such a vision, a basic income is a necessity.
Yeah.
And the way I think we get there is that, when we create a basic income, we'll be much more able to couch future economic shocks. People will be able to afford to pursue higher income work, perhaps work less. And actually, in the future, as there is less work, with the basic income, workers will be able to demand greater wages, as opposed to what traditionally happens is when there's less work, workers take less money and outcompete each other on gaining as little income as possible because they need to survive. It becomes like a employer's market, not an employee's market. But as we've seen through COVID, when people have some basic financial security, even if it's only for a few months ahead, they can demand better wages. And we saw wage growth go up in the hospitality sector during COVID because of the temporary supports. So I think that's how it happens. It'll reach a point where it'll be cool to work less than 40 hours a week, and I think as there is generally less good quality and less middle class work. No economist is predicting the creation of a lot of middle class jobs. Not a single one. We can expect there's going to be more and more low income jobs, and basic income is how a greater share of more than 50% of the population can actually pursue better work and better wages, and eventually work less, just like the wealthy do.
There's also another framing of it where it's like it's sort of a bait and switch, maybe a little, but we have this idea of what work means, and then when people bring up the idea of the future of work, our thoughts go to, okay, the quantity, like there's less work, but for me, it's a changing of the definition of work and our understanding of work. Work from an engineering sense is like moving an object a distance. It's literally just doing something or accomplishing something. And so for me, UBI is like the federal work guarantee. It's the way that we can now rename everything that we choose to do that has meaning for us, from raising our kids to brushing our teeth and going to the gym and art and writing books, and also the subcategory of that, going to work for an employer. These are all work. Like, to me, life is work. That's our purpose, is work. It's just we've taken this very narrow subset of what work should be and should encompass, which is going and participating in the labor market, and made that the whole definition.
Yeah. I really try to be careful about my language, even speaking about work, because if you start paying attention to it, you'll see it. And what I mean by that is, like, as an example, is people say that they go to work, and so, like, let's say they're doing unpaid care work at home, and then they'll say that they went to work even though they were working at home. And then work is this noun, this location, and it only exists if you get paid. But of course, that's not true. It's not this location. It's not this only paid thing. It's paid and unpaid. And when it comes to a job and employment, that is just like I said, it's a subcategory of work. And there's just so much other work than paid work. And paid work just seems to enjoy this special status as being like the only valuable work, when of course that's not true. It's not true at all.
And, I mean, we could just still see it as paid work. It's just your UBI is you are the boss paying yourself to do whatever work you think is important. You're your own boss to the extent that you need to be to survive. And then if you want to take on some other bosses or some other customers, go for it.
Yeah, and you mentioned quantity too, and I think another aspect of this is quality, where if the difference between intrinsically motivated work and extrinsically motivated work, where people work in order to obtain something like money or something else, versus working because of the benefit it provides them internally, then I would argue that there's a quality factor to intrinsically motivated work, where when people are actually free to pursue intrinsically motivated work, be paid or unpaid, that intrinsic motivation leads to just higher quality. If you can imagine a chef, and that chef, they are not doing this to survive. They're doing it because like their goal in life is to create like the ultimate food experience. Like if they can bring someone to tears with their food, like they're extremely happy about how they accomplished that. And then imagine someone else who has a gun to their head, who is being told, you need to cook something or else you're going to die. Like, I just can't imagine that food ever being as good. You can try that, and you can say, if your food isn't good, I'll kill you. But it's never going to be as good as someone who really takes pleasure and enjoyment, and has found their bliss, as far as Joseph Campbell's language, in finding what really is their purpose in life.
Yeah, I always go back to Bullshit Jobs. Such a great book, and just the idea that was one of the more profound ideas in that book was the fact that we effectively pay a premium to people who do jobs that they see are bullshit, like all the middle managers and the people doing jobs like at call centers or whatever. A lot of times you get paid more for these jobs where you're just sort of a figurehead to keep the hierarchy of your company in place, or you're just there doing something you feel doesn't really fulfill you or give to the world. You actually get paid more for that. And then there's an assumed benefit to people who are doing fulfilling work, like teachers and nurses and volunteers and stuff. It's like, well, of course you don't get paid as much because you get to actually like your job. And
yeah.
Even though these are the jobs that are the most important in society, they get paid the least because we're paying them in the good feelings they get for actually having a meaningful life. And it's like, this is how we take that perverse incentive structure out of the equation and allow more people to pursue those things that are more meaningful to them and in turn to us all.
Yeah.
We've got a minute left, I think, before 10. I don't know what Floyd's schedule's like.
Yeah, it's too hard to go.
we can talk about this all day. I
mean, anytime you need to tap out, Floyd, we'll give you a few minutes to plug what you want or give some final thoughts. But yeah, stick around as long as you want. This is usually when we open it up to the audience too, to like engage.
Okay, maybe I'll just talk a bit about our new projects. So we're doing UBI Works in Canada. Been doing that for 4 years, promoting basic income in general. But in the last 4 or 5 years of studying this, I learned a lot about history and economics, and trying to understand why some of our heroes in the space, like Professor Guy Standing and Carl Wetterquist, are always talking about social dividends from capital funds or from land value tax. And I just came to see some of the historical moral roots to justify social dividends is that we were effectively cut off from the land, both our First Nations peoples, but also anyone in any environment that has privatized land. And of course, private tenure of land has been a major multiplier of human prosperity, but one of the byproducts is that it forced people out of traditional ways of living where they had self-reliance and independence and worked to sustain themselves and build communities as opposed to working in jobs. And we've been cut off from that. And a land value tax and various eco taxes like that are a way to share in the value of the earth, which no one created, which could fund UBI. It could also fund government instead of income taxes. And so I just came to study that and realize, wow, I think one of the reasons why the housing is so expensive everywhere, especially in Canada, is because we've commoditized the value of land, and people are trading it like stocks and bonds, and everyone wants the prices to go up. But that just makes future generations poorer. So Commonwealth argues for two things. One, it argues for a land value tax in Canada as a way to reduce housing prices, primarily, but has so many other benefits in terms of increasing construction, reducing wealth inequality, improving how the economy is supposed to work, since capitalism was supposed to be built on something like a land value tax, because that's how it would have improved upon feudalism. Instead of the wealthy landlords making money off of people working the lands, everyone benefits from growing land value. And the other thing we argue for is creating social sovereign wealth funds that pay dividends like Alaska has. And that was sort of a key aha moment for me in the basic income journey, is that if we all own something together that pays us dividends, it's going to be much more defensible, just like the Alaskan fund is defensible. It'll feel more like a right. There won't be any shame about it. It's not redistributive, it's pre-distributive. And that's what Guy Standing argues for. He argues for creating a big pot of money that buys shares, and from there we pay dividends, because that's defensible. And Sam Altman from OpenAI also argues that we should have a fund that pays dividends. And when I look to the future, like long term, I'm kind of a sci-fi guy. I worry that if we don't have UBI, eventually UBI paid from some sort of commonly owned assets, be it the unearned value from nature, that economists call economic rents, and or building a pot of shares that are owned by the people, a Commonwealth fund, so to speak. Which is common. 60 countries have sovereign wealth funds. Only one of them pays dividends out. That's Alaska. If we don't do that, then I worry that long term, even a redistributive program will eventually just be a political football that could deflate, could reduce its value with inflation, just like existing social programs have since the 70s. So what we really need is a way to share in the value creation that automation has created, and what goes up in value when as society progresses. Well, the value of corporate shares, the value of land, the value of capital, and we need to find a way to share that, so that way no one can take it from you long term, as opposed to people can argue to cut something that's framed as a welfare check, but if it's framed as your property, no one can take it from you. So Commonwealth is focused on that narrative, because in Canada, we're much further ahead on possibly getting a basic income, but the discussion is very much grounded in a guaranteed basic income as a means of modernizing and improving the social safety net. So that discussion needs to happen, and I think Canada will get a negative income tax style basic income in the next 10 years, hopefully. But long term, I think we need dividends from shared assets, or else we might have a society one day that's like The Expanse or Elysium, where people have eked out a meager basic income from the super wealthy who own everything in this automated monopoly world through the political process, but it doesn't amount to very much.
Yeah, it's got to be a rising tide. However it's designed, it can't be an arbitrary number that we fight over ad infinitum for, the fight for 15 became the fight for 25, and we still haven't gotten one yet, for the minimum wage. It's got to be pegged. And some people would say cost of living, but I think it's got to be pegged to some form of prosperity growth, like average income or GDP, as flawed as that is. Something that, as like a pooled house in a restaurant, if the restaurant has a good night, everybody has a good night. Right? There's no arbitrary minimum cutoff. It's like percentage based, and tying it all to the most fundamental resources, which are land is the most fundamental resource, and people. It always reminds me of that silly moment in Al Gore's how's that movie called, about Inconvenient Truth, where he talks about all the economists sort of measuring the value of taking action against climate change versus certain measures of GDP or whatever. And he's got the earth on one side of a scale and gold bars on the other side of the scale. And he's like, look at that gold. Sure looks good. Like the earth is just where all of this exists. It's the main resource. We're all part of it. You can't measure anything against it because everything's within it. So land is the ultimate resource because we're all tied to it. It encompasses all of us. It encompasses the environment. And it's a brilliant way to really establish a commons, and it's the most important part of the commons from which we can pay ourselves a dividend that we all have a mutual right to, like an inheritance to.
Yeah, like I see it as a productivity dividend. As productivity rises, that some share that productivity should go with everybody. I tend to side with Philip Van Parij's proposal to be like 25% of GDP per capita. And again, let's doesn't necessarily have to be GDP as the measure of productivity, but the point is that however you measure overall national productivity, some percentage of that, say 25%, should flow to everybody. And when you do that, you've got this great mechanism where, because people are benefiting from rising productivity, then you actually essentially incentivize it. Like, it's actually a good thing to figure out ways of automating the job, of reducing hours, because the lower hours and you get the same done, that's higher productivity. Like, you actually set up this mechanism where everybody is in the same boat and they're all trying to figure out ways to raise that tide together. And yeah, that's a totally different thing than imagining a static kind of basic income floor set at the poverty level kind of thing, where you just focus on basics instead of just thinking just how much better things could be for everybody if you just finally shared some productivity.
I mean, in simple terms, it's a shift from competition to cooperation. We become a team rather than opponents. We're all invested in each other's success, right? So it's not a zero-sum game anymore. That's the future of work to me. Is also the future of society. Is that we're not fighting unnecessarily against each other as if only some of us can win.
So maybe if anyone has a question for me, maybe we can take it now and then I'll head out.
Yeah, so let's go ahead and take a question or a comment from the audience. Ryan, would you like to ask a question of Floyd or ask a question about basic income in terms of the future of work?
Yeah, I had a question about a specific pilot. If the Ontario pilot, like let's say a Liberal government was re-elected, would you expect them to, or would you want them to restart that same pilot or roll out something different? Is there any modifications that you'd like to that specific program?
Great question. That program was really ahead of its time. Having saturation sites, for instance, the amount that was contemplated was at the poverty level. Yeah, I don't know what. I mean, I guess from a UBI perspective, it would be nice to have one cohort be on a dividend style, because everyone was actually on a negative income tax approach. So the amounts they got was different based on income levels. So that'd be pretty cool. And I think any future pilot also needs to pay attention to measure economic indicators, like increase in work, productivity growth, changes in local business spending, because we want the pilot to not only inform social policy, but form economic policy. We want people like Krista Freeland, the Deputy Prime Minister, to say of basic income what she said of the Canada Child Benefit. Actually, no, she said that of the... she said that the new $10 a day daycare, which we're working on in Canada, to have $10 a day daycare across the country. She called it economic infrastructure, because it enables people to work, and that kind of security for children helps our next generation. And we want people to call basic income that, so that it moves it out of these left versus right, social program discussions. So that's something I would change, and I do think that they would probably reinstitute a pilot. I mean, I have spoken to candidates for a Liberal premier, for the party rather, who all said, yeah, we would reinstate the pilot. I wish they would say we'll just make a basic income, but at the moment they're just saying that. So I think that's definitely if a Liberal government gets elected in Ontario, I'm fairly certain they will roll out a pilot, and I hope they roll it out early, so we don't get into the same problems that the last one did.
I hope they also make it uncancelable. So if they lose power,
Yeah.
it can't be ended by the next Ford.
That's right.
Well, thanks for the detailed answer.
Okay.
Yeah, it's interesting just to think about what some kind of pilot approach, if anything, would be like. Is Canada just going to implement it? Like for listeners, also just so if you don't know, what's interesting about Canada too is they have the child benefit, which is essentially a basic income guarantee for kids, and you've got the senior benefit, which is essentially basic income for seniors, and it's just about covering the middle and making sure that childless adults actually are working adults are part of this too. And so there's certainly potential to actually just implement it somewhere instead of just doing a pilot. Floyd, like, do you want to say anything or about like Prince Edward Island? I know it's like one of those kind of hot spots in Canada for potentially doing something.
Yeah, Prince Edward Island is a province, equivalent to a state in Canada. It's an island, so it's actually a great place to test the basic income in terms of saturation site. It's not far from Vermont, from Maine, and currently all four political parties in government have jointly signed a letter asking the federal government to help fund. Actually, I'm sorry, I should know this better. I don't know if it's to fully fund a basic income. I think it is, not just to fund a pilot, which is huge. Even the Conservative Party, which actually is the leadership in that province, is asking for that because they understand the value of income security. So that's pretty landmark. So we're doing whatever we can to support that effort, and we hope that the federal government provides the funding, even if it's just a pilot, because that would again keep it in the news. I mean, at this stage, having pilots, I think, is really just about marketing. Like, we know basic income works, but if that's what we need at this stage of the advocacy cycle, then so be it. And I think that it would be hard to not have a basic income in the country after you have a nationally aware pilot in a major province. So I think that's a good thing. And maybe I'll end on what might be another way that we get something like a basic income is through like maybe 30 other names that all add up to a basic income. So in Canada, we have the working tax credit, which is like the ITSA in the US. Just a small number, but we saw this government during COVID increase the amount even through one-time payments. So the working tax income benefit, I believe it's something like that it's called, helps low-income workers. We have a new benefit now called the housing benefit, which is an expansion of something that worked in one of the provinces, I believe in Manitoba, that now is national, which is unconditional cash that is under the frame of rent support, but they don't tell you what to do with it. So it's like a basic income, it's just a smaller amount. I think it's like tops at around $800 or something, depending on your income level. There's the GST tax credit, which is money that comes back to low-income families to compensate for the fact that sales taxes are regressive. We have the carbon rebate. Canada has a carbon tax, and it's in not all the provinces, but most provinces, people get cash back to compensate for what they're spending in carbon pricing on gas and oil and on energy. And 80% of households are ahead in that calculation versus behind the bottom 80%, which needs the most support. So that's like a dividend from Commonwealth. I like to think about that, because who owns the sky? And if it's being polluted, then we should be compensated. And then there's the Canada Child Benefit, of course, which helps people with children, which is not enough to be basic income, but it makes a huge difference. It's reduced poverty substantially, I think by 20%. Canada was the only G7 country after 2015 to experience such a huge decline in poverty. So if you add all these things together, it seems that governments can create cash supports under the frames of whatever the hot button issues are of the day. And maybe one day they'll all add up to actually something that is like a basic income. Right now, probably like if you're a parent, all these things combined might be something like half the basic income. So that might be one way that we get this, because unfortunately, even supporters of basic income in government right now just don't feel they can run on it yet. But they can certainly run on additional targeted income measures. So maybe that's the way forward until eventually there's enough of them that they can be consolidated. So Canada in that regard is ahead because there's quite a few of these programs, and I think the housing benefit is and the child benefit and the seniors guaranteed income supplement. These are most likely basic income in that they're unconditional on how you spend it.
Yeah, I'm really excited about the carbon dividend.
Yeah, that's me too. I was going to say that.
I really like that's as far as the U.S. goes. I think that's certainly one of the most possible ways of getting some amount of dividend universally provided. And of course, I mean, who wouldn't like? I don't understand. I mean, I understand outside of the context of basic income why people wouldn't want a carbon tax because it just makes us more expensive. But the beauty of a carbon fee and rebate is that you pay more for oil and the stuff that oil goes into as an input, but then also everyone shares the rebate. And the way it works out, as you said, is that the bottom, say, 3/4 or so, are all net beneficiaries. They're all receiving more than they're paying, and it's a fully universal thing. It can be a fully universal thing because people are all equally sharing this revenue. And yeah, it just seems like a no-brainer, and I hope that at some point in the U.S. we're able to do the same thing. And for listeners who don't know, in Canada, this was essentially kind of like a minimum that provinces can do, where if they can have their own program and do it different, carbon pricing differently, but if they don't have a policy in place, then they go to the default, and the default is this cashback system.
I love that too, just because it implies the infrastructure to get the money to people. If it's fully universal, we can do what I think is necessary, which is like a postal bank or a federal bank. Everyone has some sort of non-commercialized bank account attached to their social security number or something, so that even if it's a small amount of money, if it's $100 a month or something like that, that people are getting, that's impactful already. But when the next pandemic comes along and we want to give people stimulus checks, we can do it the next day rather than months later after haggling and trying to figure out how to get it to people. And when the next opportunity, like if it's working already, we already have the infrastructure in place to be like, hey, let's find other sources of revenue and put it towards that. Let's beef up the UBI now that we know that this works and we have an easy place to just stick money, you know? So that's kind of what Comingle is supposed to be, is building an infrastructure where money can just flow all of a sudden, like a circulatory system for everyone who's connected to it.
Absolutely. All right, guys, gonna go.
All right, thank you so much for stopping by, Floyd. It was real fun.
Yeah. Thanks, Floyd.
Oh, great. See you guys.
Okay, so everybody else, we'll be sticking around for the next 40 minutes now to take questions and comments and just have more of a discussion around what we're talking about is in regards to basic income and the future of work. So Alone Long Haul Lady, do you have a question or a comment about what we've discussed?
I do. I actually have two questions.
Okay.
So the first one relates to the pandemic. I had read a story that maybe came out within the past 2 years, let's say, and it was discussing a woman who was at the time the story was in the press. I believe she was mid-50s or early 50s, and she had been an award-winning chef in a metropolitan area in Canada. I don't remember if it was Toronto or not, or a different city, but it was a major city in Canada, and she had lingering symptoms from COVID and had them at the point of the article probably over a year. And she had calculated how long she could continue to live on her savings. And she didn't have family. She was unmarried. She didn't have any adult children. And she knew exactly when her savings were going to run out. And she didn't want to have to change her living situation. She didn't want to go into some kind of home for disadvantaged people. And I apologize, I don't know what the terminology is in Canada. I'm in the US. And so she was planning on applying for MAID.
Yeah.
And I have seen a lot of accounts. I also had COVID in 2020 and I have ongoing symptoms. I've seen a lot of accounts, anecdotal accounts of people who have they're either applying for MIAD for a similar reason. It's not just that their situation, like let's say it's not just that they have a health issue. It's that they don't know how long it's going to take for anyone to solve the health issue, and they're more afraid about being a single, it's usually females, it's not always, but they don't, the idea of being a single female and being chronically ill and or disabled, and then to have to go into some kind of group living situation, the safety aspect of that change in financial status, the change in housing status, the change in safety, that's what is the more motivating factor for some of these people, besides just the uncertainty of not knowing how long it would take before a treatment or a cure would ever become available. It's this other aspect of I can't even keep up the level of standard of living that I have, which at least makes me feel safe. And
So
I know this.
How did you want to tie this to the discussion?
Well, because I'm wondering if, these are, some of these people are in Canada. A lot of them are in Canada. Like, it's not just a phenomenon happening in Canada. There are patients that have flown to other countries to apply for whatever their, legal processes. And I've read that they're in Canada, they're supposed to be opening up I can't even, sorry, made.
Just say made, yeah.
To more categories of people, including discussing people that might have mental illness, which previously I believe was disqualifying. So my first part of the question is, can there be a thought, or has there been, or could there possibly be some pilot programs aimed at helping people like that are in the chronic illness communities and the disability communities, many of whom have lots of talents that they may or may not have some ability to share, although in a different way than they were able to previously. And some may be so in a position where they can't right now, but can there be pilot programs possibly aimed at some of these people to prevent them from feeling the need to apply for MAID?
Yeah.
So that's my first part of my question.
Okay. No, let's that's
The second part
that's a long first part.
Different. Well, I'll pose the other one. I mean, these are rhetoricals. These are really meant, I guess, for if there's not an immediate answer, for you guys to sort of, maybe, to see if there's a way to address them in the future. But the other question is a little bit more simple, is can UBI and can these types of programs, can it be structured and tied in a way that it is not incompatible with those who are concerned about climate catastrophe?
Okay. So, yeah. All right. So on the first one, We actually had MAID was a big part of our discussion last week. The focus was on basic income and mental health. And so that's maybe something too you'd be interested in going to the YouTube channel for Comingle and checking out that conversation that we had where we really got into that for a bit. I will just say that yeah, I would love to see some kind of pilot focused on like a basic income for those with disabilities and opening up what we mean by disabilities, because so many of the existing programs focus on disabilities, like exclude so many people. On average, about 4 out of 5 people with disabilities are excluded from existing programs, at least in the US. So that's definitely something. And also point out that some of the city-based pilots right now going on across the country, I know at least one, and I think more than one, but at least one is includes those who were impacted by COVID and who are experiencing even long COVID. So there is at least part of that already being looked at. And yeah, I agree that when it comes to those with disabilities, basic income is such a strong argument to have that foundational floor that no one has to apply for, that reaches every single person with a disability, regardless of what it is, regardless of how often it is, whenever it happens. Like it's just so important. And then for the second part, yeah, like when it comes to the environment, I think we're already speaking about the carbon dividend, how important that would be, but there's like a pilot that comes to mind is one that was in Indonesia, I believe, and this was a large group of people in entire like villages were receiving this money, and it reduced deforestation by 30%. And so like there's definitely like kind of these pilots that maybe they're not even looking specifically at environmental impacts, but something that comes out of that is a clear environmental impact. So even when we design pilots, I agree that there should be some kind of measure, looking at the positive impact on the impact on climate change, and also recognizing how important basic income is to seeking higher ground or relocating, escaping a hurricane or a wildfire, rebuilding after these disasters happen, like those kinds of things. Conrad, Josh, did you want to say something too?
Yeah,
well, yeah, go for it.
You go, Josh.
Well, I think I think maybe one of the things that you get into with the disability-based programs is, I think what it sounds like is quite frustrating to people, is like having to prove you're disabled. Like that, just there's something just so demeaning about that. And because what is the definition of that? Like we don't have a clear measure of like when you deserve help, like, and when you're really unable to help yourself. Like it's so fuzzy, it means nothing. Like there's so like I think that's a real power of like the universality idea, that of having everybody receive an income just gets rid of that whole question. And it just you're no longer suffering that indignity anymore of having to like prove to the world that you deserve help, and that it's I think, yeah, that's my response.
My response is on the climate side. So my partner, my wife, Dea, we met, and she's a documentarian who's done a lot of climate films about plastics, about the general climate crisis. And a lot of times when you bring up the idea of basic income, there's this sort of response that, oh no, people will just go out and buy a bunch of crap and there'll be a lot more trash and plastic, or people will go consume more. And while I imagine there's a point in time where people who are basically have less than their needs might get a bit caught up. It's also the reaction that we have to not do a basic income because people will suddenly not have to suffer. It doesn't seem like, and so then they'll spend more and they'll consume more. It's sort of missing the long term and just missing the humanity of what's actually going on there. And my response in general is, there might be some more consumption in the short term when people get the things that they need, but also a big problem in this world, like with the plastics issue, is people don't have the money to invest in quality. I lived in New York for a long time, and I was one of the many people I knew who had a drawer full of plastic forks because we didn't have a moment to invest in real silverware, right? Because it's not like we're not smart enough to know that like a good pair of jeans, it's not made in a sweatshop, and some good silverware is like the right thing to do and a better investment. It's just you need money to make an investment. You can invest in quality. Another thing is I've seen this argument being pushed around by some of the new people I've been following since we've been getting out there is, and it ties into the future of work issue, is that a lot of our emissions come from trying to keep this labor market going in the fashion that it is. People trying to justify commuting to work, going to jobs that are honestly bullshit jobs, like for the sake of doing something. We're spewing out tons of emissions that we don't need to. And what does that look like when more people have the opportunity to stay home more often, work remotely, choose how they want to engage? If people can have more agency in their lives, it's impossible to know exactly how it plays out, but I think it's misguided to assume it's only going to go towards more and more wasteful consumption. What we found in our basic income pilots that we did for the docuseries we're doing, and what we've seen in a lot of basic income pilots, is that people get very conscientious and interested in how they're spending their money once the heartbeat of income comes in. They want to use it well. And part of using it well is not contributing to waste. It's not a mistake that the minimalist movement is mostly in the realm of the wealthy these days, and it's kind of obnoxious when people talk about how they're living minimalist in their penthouse apartment with their $5,000 couch and their whatever. It's like, great, good for you. You can afford to not have a bunch of crap in your house. But what happens when we allow that for a lot of people, allow people to make more of a choice based on their sense of what's a smart investment based on what they can get away with. And then the last thing, I have a lot of thoughts about the environment, obviously. The last thing is activism. UBI is the only thing that actually pays people to do activism because it pays you to do whatever you want. Yeah. This is one of my big issues with the jobs guarantee people is like, you're never going to get the government to pay people to protest itself. But activism and protest is one of the most important civic duties we have, and it is currently unrewarded. And it has that premium on work that's like, you shouldn't have to get paid because you're doing something that's fulfilling to yourself. It's so steep of a premium that people go out there and they're on the front lines at the detriment of their family and their jobs and their income. And we can change that. So we were involved tangentially with the Standing Rock stuff. Dea got thrown in jail for filming a protest nearby. And during that time I was thinking, I read this article about 4 different police officers stepped off the front line because they couldn't stand what they were doing, right? They gave up their jobs. They probably weren't going to get another job because they had done that. And what I think about is 2 groups of people on both sides of that fight. How many people would live more to their moral consciousnesses and step off that line when they're working, spraying water protectors in the face, or they're standing against the protest? And how many more people could find the time and justification and support to get to the protests, so that not only is Standing Rock the big sexy one that everyone's going to, but Bears Ears and like all the other protests going on that get underserved and it's 4 or 5 people chaining themselves to a pipeline somewhere. How many more of these things can get the support from the public they need when the general public is able to look up from their daily existential crisis and say, what do I care about more? And what a lot of people care about more is the climate right now, but that has to take a backseat to feeding your kids and not getting evicted. So if we take away those hurdles, every single activist movement becomes much more powerful, because the people engaging in an activist movement, just like the people engaging in the labor market, they're not limited by a deadline based on desperation. They can pursue it to the end, knowing that they're going to be okay. And I think that leads to a radical change in all of our social causes.
Yeah, I think this is good to lean into a bit with consumption. I've talked before about how like the future of work can actually be seen as the future of consumption. So first of all, on the flip side, like the thing that I really hate about the argument that, let's say, oh, we have to worry about basic income because if people get that, then we'll consume even more and it'll hurt the planet even more. So we shouldn't do it. And so the flip side of the argument is, okay, so why don't we increase poverty? So are you saying that increasing poverty is good for the environment? And I mean, it'll be interesting to see someone on like the far left, some ultra progressive who really cares about the planet, actually suggest that yes, we should increase poverty in order to save the planet. And of course, we are on the planet. So like it's a terrible argument to actually increase human suffering in order to save the ecosystem. And on another part of this is talking about consumption, because we definitely can tie the future of consumption with the future of work. What it makes me think of too is, like, say TikTok as an example of how this new technology came up in it, and it became hugely popular, and you've got all these people making short videos, and you've got people just spending hours consuming these short videos. And so let's say you're an artist and you're making, you make movies, and there's fewer people actually watching movies. The people who would have watched movies and who would have bought those movies are now just creating stuff for free on TikTok and watching stuff for free on TikTok. And so part of the future of work is just so demand driven. And if we want to make sure that people can actually continue to, say, create movies, then part of that is to make sure that people have the ability to pay for those movies and have the time to watch those movies. Because also one of the limits that we have right now on what we can actually consume, video wise, article wise, everything is about time. So we need to consider that as part of this discussion about the future of work, because just so much of work just depends on what it is, what the demand is for, and the ability for people to even enjoy the point of it. There was one of my favorite essays, In Praise of Idleness, by Bertrand Russell. Like, I loved how he just points out like how ridiculous it is how, say, the work of creating a loaf of bread is good and is largely seen as good, but then eating the bread is largely seen as frivolous. Unless you're just doing it for survival, then it's just like, oh, you're just consuming. But these things go hand in hand. You don't just work to work; you work to consume, and we have to actually make sure that people can actually enjoy the fruits of what all of this work is that we're doing, and to actually just appreciate that. Like, we should actually recognize the value in the enjoyment of our work, instead of just seeing this as being wasteful and the only thing that matters is work itself.
Yeah, I see that whole argument about TikTok starts to like erode away at the potential audience. I think it goes even further than that. Like, there's some monetary motivation for what's happening, to some extent. Like you see a lot of the platforms are figuring out ways of monetizing people's content creation, which is a whole other thing. But there's still the monetization of that is happening through advertisements. The advertisements are themselves based on further consumption, right? So like the more, it's still, you can't escape this, the fact that there's money tied into it, and that, the way that the economy is shifting in a way that I feel is not going to continue to support itself, at least if it evolves in a way that we want it to. And then like a purely ad-based method of making a living is dependent on people being out there buying stuff that you're advertising. Right. And yeah.
Zupanic at the Disco, do you have a question or comment about the topic of basic income and the future of work? Are you there?
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Right. Great, thanks. Hi. Yeah.
Hi.
So I do. I see myself as living in the future of work. I'm a professional game master, so I run like sessions of Dungeons and Dragons, for example, for people. And what allowed me to do that? I used to be a teacher. I taught at a middle and high school, and the stimulus checks and the child tax benefit checks that we got from the U.S. government gave me the leeway to quit that job and start up my sort of hang out my shingle as a game master. So obviously, I think that's great. So what I think about the future of work, in a sense, is that I think there will be sort of a blending of leisure and work, where people are working, doing things that we currently do in our leisure time but aren't paid for. And we might do it for money, or we might do it not for money, but either way, we'll be able to do it because of the income. And, so I think of things like, coaching a youth football league, or running a trivia night at the local pub, or, teaching each other languages in language exchange clubs, or throwing dinner parties, or anything like that, where, there are professionals who do this stuff, right? Like there are professional coaches, professional chefs, professional game masters, professional language teachers. But I think you'll see more amateurs being able to move into these spaces. And what that will do is it'll produce more personalized experiences, because these things will be happening within communities. And I think, not to get too heady about it, but I think we've lost a sense of community in the U.S. There's a lot of ink has been spilled about the sort of lack of social trust and stuff like that. And I just see, like, when I think about work today, when I think about, the job that I had as a teacher, I would come home, and then after teaching kids and after grading their papers, I wouldn't have time to do anything but consume. All I would do is, at the end of the day, I would sit down and put on the TV and eat potato chips and just be like exhausted. Whereas now I'm energized and I'm doing things, socially. I'm spending more time with my kids. So I think the future of work is that we are going to value leisure more. We're going to do things that, we may consider these things frivolous now, but I think that they add value to our lives. They build our communities.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I think it's good. That's my
That's so great, and I'm happy to hear that. I love how essentially like a proto-basic income enabled that for you. What it makes me think of, aside from what we were talking earlier about the difference between intrinsic motivation and extrinsic motivation as far as work goes, is one of my favorite quotes from Mark Twain. And I brought this up while you're speaking because it just immediately made me think of it. And so this is what Mark Twain said. What I have done because it has been play. If it had been work, I shouldn't have done it. Who was it who said, "Blessed is the man who has found his work"? Whoever it was, he had the right idea in his mind. Mark you, he says his work, not somebody else's work. Or the work that is really a man's own work is play and not work at all. Cursed is the man who has found some other man's work and cannot lose it. When we talk about the great workers of the world, we really mean the great players of the world, the fellows who groan and sweat under the weary load of toil that they bear, never can hope to do anything great. How can they, when their souls are in a ferment of revolt against the employment of their hands and brains? The product of slavery, intellectual or physical, can never be great. I just love that quote from Mark Twain. I feel that brilliant. I feel the way myself, as being, I have this basic income floor thanks to Patreon. I'm able to focus on what I feel is meaningful. And when I write and what I do, I enjoy it. I love having just sitting down to write a new article, and however long it takes to write. And it's a pleasure. And so when it's just so different to work when you're actually playing, and there's that. It's so great that what you're talking about is it's a game. Like, you're actually doing something that people consider to be gaming, but it's work, and it could be a highly enjoyable work. And if we can create a society where people are actually finding their play that is work, that that they are able to participate in a society and help contribute to society in a way where everyone's really enjoying what they're doing for the most part, and then we're even more equally sharing the remaining toil. If we're in a highly productive society with AI and robots and everything, it doesn't make any sense why, let's say, one person should be doing 80 hours a week of stuff no one else wants to do and be paid poorly for it, instead of a situation where it's more like, well, we can all do 5 hours a week of something none of us want to do. It's certainly more possible to more equally share that load instead of it being so unequally divided as it is right now.
I have a friend that does D&D campaigns also, and I'm always looking at him like, you've got it figured out. You sort of you are the future of work. Like the future of work is very much here right now. Like, people are making a living doing some crazy ass things. It's maybe not the huge career that it could have been, but there's it basically figured out how to turn a hobby and make it into a living. And I think a lot of that's enabled by technology and just sort of general creativity. But I think maybe the future of work isn't the right phrase. Maybe it's not work; it's more the future of income, like the future of getting paid to live. Is more that what we're really concerned about. Like, we could find stuff to keep us busy. That's not a problem.
We have to separate those things. Is the future of income and the future of work. And you reading that quote, Scott, made me want to read another quote if people are willing to humor one more inspirational
Go
quote.
for it. It's quote time.
This just came up today, and it's like, if you listen to this, so it's George Bernard Shaw. It was in a thing where Jeff Goldblum said it on Colbert Report. It's getting shared around. Funny story, my name is Conrad Shaw only as a stage name. I stole my name from George Bernard Shaw because when I was in acting school, I was in love with him, and I was like, what if I ever get famous? So, and then the name followed me. It's not actually my name, but I took it from Shaw, particularly because I was in love with this play Man and Superman at that time, and a lot of his other stuff. But this quote really touched me the other day, and it seemed incredibly relevant to what we're talking about. If you look at the idea of work, as we were talking about before, where work is life, work is purpose, right? Rather than work being defined as a job. And so the quote is, this is the true joy in life, being used for a purpose recognized by yourself as a mighty one, being a force of nature instead of a feverish, selfish little clod of ailments and grievances, complaining that the world will not devote itself to making you happy. I'm of the opinion that my life belongs to the whole community, and as long as I live, it is my privilege to do for it what I can. I want to be thoroughly used up when I die, for the harder I work, the more I live. I rejoice in life for its own sake. Life is no brief candle to me. It is a sort of splendid torch which I have got hold of for the moment, and I want to make it burn as brightly as possible before handing it on to future generations. And to me, that's what life should feel like. That's what we should be doing with the little time we have on Earth. I think time is the real currency that we're all playing with. So a world of UBI where people are pursuing the work that is their purpose, that they feel is their purpose, is like a different era in the history of our species.
Yeah. Another thing I thought of, Zupanic, I'm curious. I've read that game masters are leveraging ChatGPT in order to help like design what they're doing. Have you actually used that tool? Are you like a more productive game master thanks to AI?
The thing is, I'm a pretty good writer. I tried out a ChatGPT scene description, and it was just kind of bland to me. But maybe I'm not. The thing is, to do prompt engineering, as they call it, that's its own skill, and I already have GMing skills. So I don't want to sound full of myself, but I do know some GMs who do AI stuff. I know some GMs who use AI art. It's not really like there's a tool called Dungeon Alchemist, which is really good. It helps you build maps using its own algorithm. It's not really like an LLM GPT style thing. It's a simple AI. So I use that extensively actually for my maps. So I mean, AI has helped with prep to some extent. But I think that to me, it's not about productivity. And I've had friends who've tried using ChatGPT. GPT-4, I think, is advanced enough to run an actual game session. But it's not. It doesn't. They keep coming back to my game instead of doing that, which is free. And there's a reason for that. I think that the human connection, even if it's AI enhanced, the human connection is always going to be what's fun about role playing. Because I look at my kids. They're age 10 and 7. They role play. They're not playing D&D. They're playing with Legos and Barbie dolls and whatever, right? But they're role playing, and it's about using your imagination. And there's an AI can't supplement that, right? So I think I don't share the same anxiety about AI that a lot of other people do in these fields. I do understand there are debates about AI art being used in like gaming supplements, people putting out books with AI art in them, and then they're edging out the artists who are drawing fantasy scenes and stuff. That's a big issue. But I feel like as a GM,
you're in a good example there, because like people can play computer generated games all they want. Like video games are totally fun. Like, and those are all, I mean, ultimately they're people generated, but like you can sit there and interact with the computer and have a great time. But you can also have a great time interacting with another person that's sitting there pretending with you, and it's two different. They don't cancel each other out.
Right. Yeah, I mean, I spend a lot of time on Baldur's Gate 3, as do all of my players, and it's a different experience. The other thing I wanted to say is that there's a debate in the gaming community about whether paid GMing is a legitimate job, right? Because there are people who will do it for free, and it's like, why should I pay for something that I was able to get for free when I was in high school or whatever? You go down to the local comic store and there's a GM available or whatever, or my friends would do it. So there's this debate about what work is, right? Is doing something that you find fun, does that count as work, right? And that's something that I think we're going to see a lot more of as we move towards, UBI and other ways of supplementing income. I think people are going to wonder like what, and it's not just for the financial remuneration, it's also the status. Because one of the things I've noticed is that when I used to tell people, oh, I'm a teacher, it's like there's recognition, right? But when I say people, I'm a professional game master, it's like, well, what the heck is that? So like, does that count as a job, right? Like,
yeah, there's this whole class of jobs that like you look at and you're like, you're just, it's the ones that you're having fun with.
Yeah.
They're more like hobbies. They're things that you would probably be doing anyway. that they're like, jobs or hobbies. They're like, they're like jobbies. They're, right in between. Right? But I think more and more people are finding that those things that are hobbies are like, oh, these are the things I'm good at because I like them. And then figuring out how to turn that into a living is like, it's a whole other project, but it's not as hard as
it evolves over time. I'm sure all of us, played video games as a kid. I certainly played a good amount, and I could never I never like imagined growing up to be like a professional video game player, But like now, kids these days, you can do that. Like you can actually do that. Like you can become a popular streamer. You can make that. You can be competitive in esports. Like that wasn't a thing, and it became a thing. And it's like, I wanted to be a professional baseball player as a kid, and that was, baseball was a game. That was the game I wanted to grow up to be as a professional player, and there will always be these games like this. This what we want to do. So when, like, so many people will think, oh, like, dystopian impact of basic income and automation is this Wall-E future of people just doing nothing at all except for eating and floating around on chairs, and that's not the case. There will always be something that we will want to do for fun, and I think the Game Master is a good example of something aside from video gaming, where something you do for fun you can be paid for, and especially if people have money to spend to do it. Like it's a different situation if nobody has any money to spend. Like good luck being a game master if everybody's poor. But like if people have money to spend, then that opens up as a possibility. I'm excited that Katie has joined us, and I'm looking forward. First of all, hi Katie, welcome, and it's great to have you here.
Hi, it's great to be able to join one of these spaces. I've listened in on recordings of some of your previous ones, but they just didn't work with my schedule. But at my company, we have Fridays as PTO, so today worked out for me to be able to join. And thank you for hosting all these spaces. I really appreciate it.
Were you here in time to hear us tangentially refer to you earlier when we were talking up?
No, I didn't hear that, but thanks, I guess. Thank you.
He was announcing himself as the anonymous donor we had, and we mentioned that his anonymous donations, his matching inspired a couple other donors. So for everyone here, Katie Machoris and her company, Luda Security, were one of the matching donors that bumped us up to, at one point, I think a 9x matching. And really powered this crowdfund over the finish line that we're doing for Comingle.
Yeah, well, I mean, as you know, I really believe in unrestricted basic income, and I think it is the future of not just the future of work, but the future of humanity. One thing I wanted to weigh in on was something off of what Zupanic was saying, and I think you actually touched on it, Zupanic, about your lack of fear of AI in your professional space, even though there are people who will offer to do what you do for free. And I just wanted to offer perspective from over 20 years in the cybersecurity industry, where, at the very beginning, services were quite expensive. They were boutique. And then commoditization, not through AI, but through different forms of automation came on board, and not just reduce the cost to do certain activities, but also reduce the quality. And you'd think that, the higher quality work would still be protected. And in fact, what it caused was a market shrinkage, So there have been several ups and downs in the cybersecurity market, but all of them with automation sort of reducing cost and reducing time it took to do, quote unquote, the same tasks, but it's much lower quality. However, people had a hard time justifying paying for the more expensive, higher quality work when they could get something that checked a compliance box for a much lower price, often orders of magnitude lower. So I think that's honestly the real danger with AI and the labor market, is not that, the skilled practitioners like yourself, Zupanic, and others, in their respective fields, it's not that the skilled practitioners, that there won't be a demand for them. It's just that the majority of demand will flow towards those much cheaper sources of labor, and in the case of AI, artificial labor. So that's what I'm worried about, and I do want to see UBI adopted as an insurance plan for humanity to make it so that, you know, we don't lose whole swaths of potential for income and have nothing to take its place.
Or have like garbage to take its place, you know, like AI generated sort of poor imitations of what a skilled human can produce.
Yeah, I mean, trust me.
I kind of like AI. Chat GPT. I asked it if it knew who I was, and it gave me credit for some of what Scott wrote, and that was sort of flattering.
I usually ask it for a list of female hackers, and it lists 2 women who were not hackers, me, and then 2 men. That's what ChatGPT knows about female hackers. But no, I mean, I like AI as well. I've used it for some brainstorming and helping me, you know, kind of get over my ADHD writing block to start me off on certain things. But at the same time, you know, I'm in a privileged position where I run my own company, and I can set, you know, I do what you were talking about a little earlier, which is I do my labor as more of a labor of love and an occupation that I enjoy. But I don't see that possibility showing up for a whole lot of other people in my industry unless something changes. And especially with more AI coming into the cybersecurity field, I feel like, you know, there's got to be a way for people to engage that creativity that, you know, I'm a hacker, I'm a professional hacker, and our job is often creativity. And